So, Tyreek Hill is now a member of the Miami Dolphins. He was traded away, and he's been very supportive of his new quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. He's been very outspoken in defending him after the video surfaced on social media in which it looked like Tua underthrew him when they were messing around in practice. And so everybody's been making jokes, and Tyreek Hill's been nothing but defending his quarterback. And then he was on his podcast, the It Needed to Be Said podcast over the weekend and had this to say about his new quarterback. This was Tyreek Hill on Tua.
Nah, believe this or not, man. You know, in the NFL, they only give you like 2 to 3 years to be a successful quarterback, especially if you're a first-round draft pick. And if you don't succeed after those years, then it's kick rocks, man. So basically, they don't put Tua into that. I feel like so. It's basically his last year, man, just to show people what he got.
So there's Tyreek Hill.
I'll tell you what, if there wasn't enough pressure on Tua Tagovailoa at this point, Tyreek Hill sure as hell ain't going to help either. I mean, he sounds like the type of wide receiver that if things go wrong early this year, he's out. Like he's thrown in the towel on this dude.
He's not lying. Yeah, probably is.
No, I mean, everything he said's true. It's just like,
why say it?
Dude, we all know it too. I don't know that he needs to say it. Like when you have here's what happens when players have podcasts. They think just because they say something like it's a revelation. It's like, no, not really. Like everyone knows that. Everyone's saying it already. It's just because you're a player now you're saying it. Like, yeah, Tua knows that too, man. We'll see how this whole thing goes. He's been like defending him. They've been talking big about what kind of season he's going to have. But these podcasts are going to lead to, at some point, him saying something that like maybe ruins that relationship with Tua. And the longer he gets away from Kansas City, the more you're like, oh, okay, like maybe this is one of those scenarios where Kansas City saw something before everyone else did. Like there was another organization that saw something before everyone else did. That was a great talent. Just saying. It's got that sort of, like the beginning of that sort of feel to it.
Ow. I hope that's not what it is.
I hope so too, man. I'm just saying.
I actually think this is where media is going. And social media has opened the door to now platforms giving athletes a voice in a different manner. And so now that has now morphed into guys are now creating their own podcasts. And then, you're looking at it from a perspective of, again, news sources aren't really breaking news anymore. It's all about the content coming from the source, like from a Tyreek Hill, from a Tua, from these, from a Draymond Green. And it's going to be interesting to see now with the NIL space coming to life as well, how that happens at the different levels, at college and in high school. And so this is something that people are going to have to get used to. This is something that coaches are going to have to adapt to and try to figure out how to manage. I think that's the bigger discussion here, is that how in this new environment of media and the way it's being created and the way it's being consumed, how are old school coaches? I mean, could you imagine Lou Holtz or Joe Paterno or some of these older school type of guys who were no nonsense and didn't want you to have social media or didn't want you, like I remember social media was just coming out and Joe was like, no, like you will not use it. You don't have the luxury of being able to control the situations the way that you once were able to in earlier days.
You're saying social media was coming out when you were playing for Joe Paterno?
I mean, MySpace had just came out.
Really? God, MySpace. I mean, I'm not trying to age you. I'm just saying, man. I feel like at the end of college we had the Facebook. Like it wasn't even like a a real thing.
MySpace was out
like
when I was
07.
in school. I'm not that much older than you. Not much. I mean, maybe a little bit. What, 7 years, 6 years, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting, especially in the pros, right? Because pros tend to speak how they feel, and the ones that are going to venture off into doing their own podcast, if they don't have the right guidance and they don't have the right coaching to do it, they're going to say things they shouldn't say, even though they were things that were relevant to the topics that were being discussed.
By the way, do you think the Miami Dolphins are going to tell Tyreek Hill to cool it on the podcast, or are they not allowed to?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And how do you tell them?
Yeah.
How do you tell him to do that? You know, what do you say in that scenario?
Is there language and I'm asking this seriously, is there language in a contract? Because Drew Rosenhaus appeared on the first edition. Did they say, hey, you know, he is going to have a podcast on the side, or is this just a separate entity in itself and he does what he wants to do and the Dolphins just have to deal with it? Like, how does that work when it comes to this stuff and players having their own podcasts now?
I mean, players have always had their own shows, their own
radio
segments
show,
on
podcast,
shows. That's always existed. It's just more, you don't have to have Fox or CBS or, you know, you don't have to have those outlets now. You can create your own podcast and you can put it out over your social media channels. So that's what makes it interesting, is that you, in theory, could have, you know, plenty of guys on the team that are doing these podcast ventures. So there's no way of really managing it other than to say, like, have somebody come in and educate your players on how to go about doing it, maybe some do's and some don'ts, things to stay away from. If anything, what I would say is these teams probably need to start thinking about hiring someone internally that's just their job, is to manage and regulate and guide the pros that end up doing shows. That's what I would do.
Yeah, they're just not as good as this one.
No, the team will say something. You know, they're gonna come out and say, hey, you know, try to, you know, entertain this messaging. No different than any other employer. You know, I mean, ultimately you have to be accountable for what you say. Look, it's no different than the business we're in right now. You know, I've been having conversations with executives about messaging as to what's happening in the college football landscape. You know, and you'll hear from them if they don't feel like you're accurately portraying that message. So that'll be a conversation that's had with Tyreek Hill at some point. I just wonder if it's going to turn negative, if it will turn negative. I'm not saying he took shots at Patrick Mahomes, but in the manner in which he spoke about, you know, hey, you know, he threw it 10 yards, I took a 75, whatever it is. You know, however he goes about talking about it, it will come back to get him. Like, I don't know many guys who they leave a good situation, one where they won a Super Bowl. You were with arguably one of the better talents at quarterback that we've seen in the league in maybe a generation, and end up having greater success. Like, my bet, that's just not going to happen for Tyreek Hill. Like, he had a great contract. He got what he wanted. You know, he's living in a place that maybe is closer to family. I don't know that he's going to have as much success as he had in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, that organization, and everything else, that window that they're in right now. It's just most likely going to be the case. And I think those frustrations that he's going to experience, you know, from getting out of that, it's going to all be on the podcast, and that might be great entertainment for us. It's just not a good thing for the Miami Dolphins.
Who do you think has a better year, Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill?
I think Adams will.
I do too.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's difficult about that, you know, conversation is, like, Jalen Waddle caught over 100 balls
That's
last
the
year.
thing. Like, there's no guarantees that Tyreek's going to be the number one option. Jalen Waddle was fantastic last year.
He was phenomenal. They've got a bunch of guys, too, to throw to, even just besides those two. You know, they've got a really, really good roster. I think Hill will be, but even then, you're still dividing it up amongst a number of guys. If you look at the difference between Devontae Adams and everyone else on that roster for the Raiders, it's like, okay, and they're in a Josh McDaniels system where he knows how to isolate guys and get the matchups that he wants from formations and everything else. I just trust what Josh McDaniels is going to do with Derek Carr and with Devonta Adams more so than what I think is going to happen in Miami.